I am quite new to your education system. I've been learning quite a bit about it in the time that I've been here. So I am not going to stand up here and tell you that I have new and innovative ways that you must apply. But if you'll indulge me, what I will do is introduce you to a couple of lines of research and activity that I've seen in the U.S. that might in some ways reflect or you might find value in. So I'll talk a little bit about something we're calling transformative participatory evaluation, and then I will move into a science integration in a K through 5 education program that I was involved in evaluating in California. So just briefly, we talk about participatory evaluation. You've talked quite a bit about evaluation and assessment and the differences between the two. We talk very much about evaluation more in the broader scheme of things, much grander than just looking just at one context. And so we also talk very much about the fact that if evaluation is done well, most times it has some sort of participatory element. And those choices are where we start to define how we talk about participatory evaluation. This is a popular graph and figure that is used when we talk about participatory processes, and we talk about them across three major dimensions, and that is the selection of the people who are involved in that process, so your selection of your stakeholders, the depth of their involvement in that process, and then the control over the evaluation as it goes forward. Is it entirely in the hands of the evaluator, or is it really entirely in hands of the people who are most impacted by the program and the evaluation, or the curriculum and the evaluation? And so most every evaluation you engage in, you can place somewhere on this particular graph if you are at all involving stakeholders in your evaluation. So this is a way that we talk about our participatory processes in evaluation. So one of the research processes that I was involved in asks about when you get stakeholders involved, what outcomes of that process? Why do you involve them? Therefore, what are you trying to get out of that? So what are those processes? What do you do to ensure stakeholder involvement, and what outcomes do you intend to create? So that was the question behind this particular line of research. So what we did is we actually asked evaluators all over the world to use an online mapping system that took 27 variables all on the left-hand side that were related to evaluation, and we asked them to map their process around this very center one, which says stakeholder involvement. So they could drag their processes in, they could draw an arrow from one to the other, and in the end, this would be their depiction of what they do on the left, so to speak, and what they get on the right. So a left-to-right process. And what we got from this large sample of people from around the world is this sort of mapping of what their participatory processes look like. And so if you notice that up in the upper right-hand corner here, shared understanding was the most important outcome that people talked about in their involvement of stakeholders in the process evaluation. They involved people so that when they were in that process, they were developing a shared understanding of the program, the process, and their roles in that process. And I could probably spend another day on this, but I won't because I have 5 minutes or less, right? So what I'll do is I'll just briefly touch on a couple of the top most important links that were mentioned by this sample. At least a quarter of them agreed, more than a quarter agreed, that stakeholder involvement to shared understanding, you saw that link, was the most important. The next most important was they involved stakeholders because of the diverse perspectives that they provided to the process. I think that, to me, is one of the most important pieces of the process. You bring them to the table because of their perspective. It helps inform the process. And then stakeholder, I skip over the develop judgments and report and disseminate because that's much more of a process-oriented thing. But I think the stakeholder involvement to building capacity, we involve them because we want them to learn what evaluation is like and how they might participate in it themselves and how they might take it on themselves. And then the last one I have highlighted, I wanted to bring our attention to, is this use of local program knowledge. The reason we involve stakeholders is because, as an evaluator, I may not be embedded in their culture and their program and their processes to know what are the nuances of that process. So I involve them, or these people involve them, because we want to use that local program knowledge. So essentially, that's one way of thinking about evaluation from a participatory approach, when you decide on who to involve in your process and for the reasons for which you do it. So that's one particular piece that I thought that you might indulge my interest in providing it to you. So what I'll do is, this other topic that I want to talk about is something that actually happened in a set of California schools. There is, throughout the U.S., not in every school, but sporadically across schools, there is this FOSS, Full Option Science System, which is essentially kits, boxes, full of materials that are placed into a K-5 school. And those have all the materials one might need to do science projects and do experiments and things like that. And so those are placed throughout throughout schools. And they found, they've been in class, I think, about 15 years they've been in the California system, and they've been neglected. They're not used much. Why? Because we've really moved into a high-stakes testing environment where the students are being tested on those things that hit the highest marks for their grades, mostly their language acquisition, English language learning. About 33% of our population in California was not born in the U.S. So we have a large population of, in that number, that's a pretty large population. And so they're in our schools, and they're learning English usually as a second language. Right? So that's the high-stake testing. So what happens? They avoid talking about or spending time on science because they don't have time to, because they're teaching to the test. We talked a little bit about that here. I heard a little bit about that in your presentations. So a bunch of people who were involved in designing FOSS 20-plus years ago decided to try something new. And so they got a grant from the University of California, Berkeley, which happens to be where they also were employed. But they got almost $1 million to start a learning academy, where what they did is they brought in teachers from a bunch of K-5 schools into this academy. And the academy essentially was a 1-week summer and 3 weekends a year where they would get together as a team and they would talk about what they're doing in their classrooms. And what their goal was to go back to their schools and develop grade-level teams where they would talk about how they could integrate science into their mainstream curriculum of language learning. And so science integration was what they were looking to do. Bring science into language learning so that if they have a grammar class, they're talking about a science topic during grammar class. And so their hope was that they would have some sort of impact in test scores beyond language arts. And so what I was doing, and I won't spend much more time on it, but I just wanted to introduce you to the idea that what I was doing as the evaluator is I was observing classrooms, and I was observing the kind of activities that were going on at these elementary schools. And so a lot of what was happening were these science nights, where they would have 4 classrooms open, and there would be 3 to 5 teachers in each classroom doing some sort of science experiment. And the kids would bring their parents, and they would roam from classroom to classroom to classroom and participate in these science experiments. Well, not only did it introduce the kids that maybe hadn't been to that particular class, but it also introduced their parents to science. So all of a sudden the parents started getting involved in their education of their kids. And it didn't take a lot of money and it didn't take a lot of time, but the teachers were engaged enough that they were at all of these science nights. And that was actually one of the outcomes that we saw from this Leadership Academy, was that there was an increase in these science nights, and there was an increase in the teachers getting involved in science night and then integrating science into their classrooms. And so I just have a couple of images of what it looks like. This is some teachers, What they also did is if a child came to a table and participated in a science experiment, he or she carried a little brown paper bag with a little piece of paper on it, and if the teacher put a stamp on it, and the kid got 4 stamps, then they didn't have to bring their homework in for like 2 more days. So there was a little bit of an incentive for that. Right? So essentially, this is what it was. And then I went to this open house where it was on a Saturday. And this was their gymnasium in the school, and it was packed with students and their families for 7 hours. That they were just coming and going and coming and going, and kids were showing off their own posters and science projects, and they were doing the experiments like the science nights. And so this whole integration, we don't know if they're going to roll this academy out larger. It's very hard to track these kinds of numbers, to give some sort of evaluation numbers that then help them get another $1 million to invest in 5 other school districts. But essentially, it was an idea that they're right now actually in that place where they're looking at our evaluation report and saying, okay, so where do we go next with this? Can we scale it up? Can we replicate it? And how much does it take? And how engaged do we have to be? And what's it going to cost? So that, this is a fun one. They had a little pie tin, and they put paint in it, and then they dropped a marble in. And their goal was to move that around and learn what it was like to shift and move the marble on balance. And so there was a science around that. And so they were making their own paintings with the marble and paint. That's it.